a little bit after noon. My name is Jessa Frost. I'm the program director here at North House Folk School. We are a little place on the very edge of Minnesota. We're located right on Lake Superior, and our role in the world for the last 25 years has been teaching classes as a way of building community and enriching lives. And that's taken lots of different formats. We teach all kinds of different traditional Northern crafts. And in recent years, we have taken some of our efforts to build community and enrich lives to this new online format, which has been wonderful because we get to connect with so many of you in places far flung and have you be part of our craft community, even though we can't all be cozied up knitting or stitching together. This is the end of our fiber month, so to speak, fiber week. Our last in a series of webinars. If you missed any of our earlier webinars offered this month, they were fabulous, and they can all be watched on our website, northhouse.org. There are links to recordings, tons of really wonderful stories from Guatemala and Kyrgyzstan and the Kola Peninsula of Russia and Anishinaabe traditions in Minnesota even. So lots of great stories. Don't miss out on those. Other little sort of North House bits and pieces. Our spring catalog has hopefully shown up in your mailbox if you are on our mailing list. Registration for our, oh, Laura's holding it up for you to see. Registration for our spring or for our summer and winter and fall coursework for 2022 opens to members on the 28th of February and to the general public on March 1st. So you can see everything on our website. Check out what you might want to think about coming to visit us, and make sure to get on the stick on the 28th or the 1st and get yourself into class. There are also scholarships available. Scholarship applications open on the 1st of March. So please don't let finances be a barrier to coming and learning with us. And please share that information too with folks who might be, who that might help out. I think that is most of the North House news I wanted to share. We are still accepting applications for the Artisan Development Program. So if you are interested in moving to Grand Marais and pursuing craft for 2 years, that might be of interest to you as well. Okay, from a Zoom standpoint, many of you have joined us before. You know how this works. Down at the bottom of your screen is that great chat function. Feel free to add comments or clarifying questions in the chat throughout the presentation. If you have questions that you'd like Laura to address, use the Q&A buttons, the 2 little bubbles, to drop those in there so that we don't lose track of them. And we'll come back at the end of the presentation and address some of your great questions. There are closed captions available for this. Just go ahead and click on the closed caption part, and that should take care of helping you translate everything we're chatting about. So I think that's all of my Zoom housekeeping. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Laura Ricketts, who is a lead instructor here at North House, to introduce our speaker for the day.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I was up in Grand Marais just recently, and now I'm down in Rochester, Indiana, which, although it's far away from Grand Marais, we do have a really strong quilting tradition down here. So I've been in that area where Laura Brown is now, and she had an open house. It's a delightful workspace. I can't wait to hear what she has to say, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you. Laura Brown is an artist interested in color, process, imagination, and repetitive labor-intensive tasks. She grew up in the rural high desert of southwestern Colorado and the north woods of Wisconsin, and hails from a maternal lineage of professional and home sewists. Her work includes printmaking, installation, book arts, and textiles. As part of the Artisan Development Program, she continues to expand her quilt making knowledge and practice, including the use of natural dyes and local forage plants. Please welcome Laura Brown.
Thank you, Laura Ricketts. Thank you, Jessa. Thank you, North House. I'm having a moment where I'm worried about my internet, but I think it's going to be okay. So if in the middle of this, it all goes to hell, we'll figure out a way to get you a full recording of this presentation. Okay, so Jessa mentioned, I'm gonna start, ooh, here we go. I have used Zoom before. So I'm excited to share this presentation with you today. And I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping of my own, which is to say thank you. And also to say that Jessa mentioned the classes that are coming out that are going to be available for the fall or summer and fall. I'm offering 2 classes if anybody is interested in sewing or quilting. One called The Essentials of Sewing, June 25th and 26th. And that's a real basic sewing, get to know your sewing machine and feel confident with it. And then a class on quilting in November called Nothing New, Make a Quilt from Old Clothes. And that's November 10th through 13th. And also, I just want to put in another plug for the Artisan Development Program. This is the view that I wake up to every morning. It's Lake Superior at sunrise on a winter's day. It's just gorgeous. If you are a person who makes crafts with your hands as a profession, or you want to be a professional and you love the model of folk school learning and you are looking for a reason to move to Grand Marais, consider applying for the Artisan Development Program. So I'm just feeling really fortunate to be here and have this space. So you can find a summary of the application and all of the class information at northhouse.org. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll share my information at the end. So I chose today's topic because I am really interested in the way that language operates in writing and in visual art. As Laura Ricketts mentioned, in addition to working with textiles, I am a printmaker and a book artist. And writing is really integral to my way of processing experiences and ideas. I see a lot of parallels between printmaking and quilting. They both center community and their production processes, whether it's a community print studio or a quilting bee. And I believe they are both truly for everyone. They're very democratic processes. You don't need much to get started with either one. They are also both related to revolutionary developments in technology, the development of the printing press and the development of fibers into cloth really changed life for the people who developed them, and then also for all of us who have benefited from that since. They're also both used as forms of activism and resistance. So this slide has on the left a print that I made that reads, "Are women people yet?" And on the right, a quilt designed and made by my friend Darcy that says, "Women's rights are human rights." And I paired these because we ran into each other at a protest where she was wearing her quilt and I was passing out these prints. And the strength of the prints is that they're small and able to be distributed in multiples. And her quilt strength was in the size and the bright colors. And ultimately, there are 2 different ways of sharing your voice and making your views known. Working with our hands is such a powerful thing to do. It is something I really love about sewing, and hand sewing in particular. I love the phase of hand quilting when my muscle memory can just take over and my mind gets to wander. This is often when I can work through problems or think about new ideas. Making things is so powerful. It's a way to use and develop our voices and articulate our feelings and perspectives. Last week, I co-hosted a webinar with Madeline from an organization called Multicolores, and they work with artists, women in Guatemala, to make hooked rugs and embroidery as artists. And it's a way of helping them to earn money and also use their creativity and their voices. And she told a story about one of the artists who became her city's first woman council member. And she led a successful opposition to a measure that would have put a garbage dump near her community. And that just reminded me to never doubt the connectedness between creativity, expression, and change. Also, textiles are universal. We all interact with fabric. Every day we're interacting with it right now. We protect our bodies with clothing. We sleep under cozy covers. We dry ourselves and our dishes with towels. The development of turning various plant and animal fibers into cloth is a technology that goes back to really early humanity. Evidence of patchwork has even been found in ancient Egyptian tombs. So this meant that instead of needing to use animal skins as coverage and caves as dwellings, humans could move about more and live in colder climates. So what is the language of quilting? Every visual media has its own vocabulary, whether it's the words that we use to talk about a craft process, its tools and techniques, or its origin or final form. When I talk about the language of quilting, I'm referring to the things that make quilts quilts, especially traditional ones. And some of these features are that they are 2 layers of fabric with batting in between, stitching or ties that hold the 3 layers together, the use of recycled or salvaged materials, geometric shapes that make up patchwork blocks, or as I'll get into in a few minutes, the process of applique quilting. Quilting in particular is a medium where many works are anonymous. We recognize that hours of labor and love go into a quilt, but we don't always know who put all that time and attention into making them. So when there is actual text, like names and dates, it really gives us a picture of who made the quilt, and it helps us trace where it came from and how old it is. As is the case with many crafts, the urge to make textiles beautiful goes hand in hand with making them functional. So I chose a few quilts from different places and times to give a sense of how quilts have survived through time. These quilts have common traits: a sense of narrative, a particular style visually, and sometimes text. So I hope that this talk can just serve as a portal or an entry point for your own curiosity. I made a list of references that I can email with the recording tomorrow. And feel free to reach out with any questions. Of course, there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. So feel free to put them in the Q&A chat. So this is a really old quilt. It is called the Tristan quilt. And it was made in the late 1300s in Sicily, where linen was being manufactured at the time. The fabric originally was white linen, and the thread is brown and white linen. It's quilted using a technique called trapunto, which means to quilt in Italian. And this means that some of the areas between the layers of fabric have extra wadding or batting. And so then those areas puff out a little bit. So you can see a little bit of extra texture in the arm of the right-hand figure and in some of the leaves and decorations around the border. Here's a closer view of one of the panels. This is also a really big quilt. It's like 126 inches tall by 112 inches wide. And it depicts many scenes from the legend of Tristan and Isolde. So here on this one, I wanted to really give you a view of what that like puffiness kind of does. If you look at the right-hand clover kinds of shapes, that's where I see a lot of trapunto kind of like coming through, honestly, because it's so old. And then also in the text around the figure, you'll see some more puffiness. And this to me, although it doesn't like fully resemble the marble facade of like Renaissance architecture or something, I really think of it as having sort of a relationship to that. It kind of reminds me of a low relief sculptural panel. And then I also wanted to share this image because it's got that nice little mended hole right in the middle. And one of the things I really love about textiles is that they can be repaired. And it's not the end of the world if something needs to be mended. In fact, it's an opportunity to add to the story of the object. I think this is something that gives more life and depth to the things that we live with. And mending can also be a way to resist over-consuming or throwing away things that are perfectly useful and just need a little bit of TLC. This quilt is called the Raja quilt. And we call it a medallion quilt because there's a central piece in the middle that is appliqued. And then there's patchwork borders around it. It's another large quilt, 127 inches by 132 inches. In 1841, a ship called the Raja sailed from England to present-day Tasmania with 180 prisoners on board. They were all women. And the women in charge of the British Ladies Society for Promoting the Reformation of Female Prisoners, that's a mouthful, provided the inmates with sewing supplies and embroidery supplies so that they could have something to do on the voyage, because they really believed that sewing and patchwork were ways to sort of like self-soothe and be calm, and then also just like be occupied. So 29 women on the ship collaborated to make this quilt as a gift for the head of the Ladies Reformation Society, Elizabeth Fry. And the story goes that they sent it back to England, and somehow it ended up like in an attic somewhere. But then when it was discovered many years later, it helped that at the very bottom, you can see that there is sort of a wreath of flowers, and that surrounds an inscription that reads, "To the ladies of the Convict Ship Committee, this quilt worked by the convicts of the ship Raja during their voyage to Van Diemen's Land is presented as a testimony of the gratitude with which they remember their exertions for their welfare while in England and during their passage, and also as a proof that they have not neglected the ladies' kind admonitions of being industrious." June 1841. So with that inscription, we know exactly who made this and why and when, which is really helpful information. And without that, we might not have it. So in addition to there being text here, there's also this, what I would call the language of quilting, where the geometric blocks that form around the center medallion are recognizable quilt blocks. I call those X squares broken dishes pattern. There's also the diamonds that are really common. And then the half square triangles are also there, creating almost a flying geese look, except for that there's more squares in between them. So applique is a quilting technique that allows for more flexibility in shape than just the geometric quilting of patchwork. So patchwork is typically geometric and sewn with straight seams, but with applique, you have a background fabric, and then out of a different fabric, you just cut the shape, lay it on your background fabric, and then turn the edge of the fabric under and hand sew it on. So like you see here, there are beautiful curves. There's lots of tiny pieces. This allows the maker to use flowers and organic shapes. It provides a lot more ease in sewing curves and circles. And this is a really great close-up of this process. So tent making, using the process of applique, is a practice that goes back centuries in the Middle East. And the ones I'll talk about today are particularly from Cairo. So this is like a craft that was passed down through generations, through families. And so I want to share several historic images of these tents. So notice the scale of these designs. This is a smaller tent, but there's a lot of curves and a lot of details. And there's text, and it's Arabic text, which is like very calligraphic and not what we would normally think of as something that would be easy to use in a medium like quilting. So again, look at the scale of this. Look at these panels that are joined, but obviously split. And I don't know if that like glitch looking thing on the left that goes vertically through the panel is like a photographic glitch, or if it's like a patch that was made, but I think that that's visually interesting. So as I was scrolling through these historic photos, I was thinking about how these tents serve as the literal backdrop of the history of Cairo. And all of these men are meeting and all of these events are happening. And it just shows how many generations that this has been a practice for. And there's also a documentary that I found these documents through called The Tent Makers of Cairo, which is about the street on which all of the tent makers have been working for generations, and how in 2011, the Arab Spring, they were really caught in the middle of all of the protests and uprisings. Again, there's a link to architecture. The tents themselves are architecture, but the designs are definitely related to and inspired by permanent and traditional buildings. And this is a shot of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Another beautiful and very different use of applique is in the quilts of Harriet Powers. Harriet was born as an enslaved person, but she made these quilts after her emancipation. And I definitely see these as books, maybe because they are organized in squares and they clearly contain narratives. She even left descriptions for each panel. So this quilt is called the pictorial quilt, and the images are a mix of Bible stories and real life events. She has another quilt that's been preserved. I believe it's just the two quilts of hers that still remain today. And that one was called the Bible quilt, and it was purely images from the Bible. So you can see here on this Adam and Eve square, you can see the snake to the side of Eve, and the object that, the white object that is next to Adam's hand is his rib. And then there are other elements of the creation story, along with, quote, God's all-seeing eye and God's merciful hand. So that's an example of a Bible story. And then this panel shows, is basically documenting a real life event. Again, you have the hand. So I think that that is like kind of a consistent image, maybe signifying that God is watching over them, because what happened here on November 13th, 1833, there were so many shooting stars happening that people were freaking out and thought it was the end of the world. So these panels provide reference points for experiences and ideas that I would guess were important to Harriet, not unlike a journal or a diary might function. Then we have Swedish quilts. So Asa Wetra, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, did some groundbreaking research in the history of quilts in Sweden, which led to a traveling exhibition, a collection of quilts, and the publication of her book called Old Swedish Quilts in the early 1990s. So in the 1980s, she had been teaching classes, quilting classes at the Folk University in Gothenburg. And she was so interested in quilting and quilt arts that she started a group called the Quilt Witches. And they got their name from the hexagon shape, which is often used in quilting, and that the word for witch in Swedish is hexa, and the fact that they were bewitched by quilts. So there's some pretty cute wordplay there. So this kind of led her to start asking everybody she knew if they had any old patchwork quilts, and she just kind of like kept digging and digging. And she ended up with a lot of quilts and a lot of stories, and she gathered those stories into the book and published it, which I think happened at a time when lots of people could still remember early 20th century or late 19th century family stories, and could still get their hands on some of those quilts to make such a beautiful collection. These are two examples from the book. And so in Sweden, there were the quilts that were made for wealthy people out of beautiful silks and chintzes and velvets. And then there were the quilts that poor people made out of old clothes and other scraps. So I found a lot of quilts in the book that were kind of a combination of maybe a centerpiece of patchwork surrounded by a wide border, because whole cloth quilting was something that definitely happened in Europe. And then in the 1800s, immigrants to America would send back to Sweden these magazine pieces and patterns for patchwork quilts. And around this time also, paper manufacturing had been previously done with cloth, but around that time it switched to being made from wood pulp. And so that made more cotton available for things like patchwork quilting. And also I would like to insert a sidebar fun fact here, that the term rags to riches refers to turning rags into pulp and into paper. Benjamin Franklin, they talk about rags to riches story. It wasn't so much that he was poor and then he became rich, it was that he had the idea to make money and develop the currency. And so anyway, US currency is still printed on a blend of cotton and linen. Sidebar over. Anyway, because paper production isn't using up all of those small pieces of cloth, they could be made into quilts. And so by about 1870, printed cottons were more common. And then also, the more the quilts were being made, then that meant that people could replace their knotted pile rugs that they had been sleeping under. I've seen a knotted pile rug. It does not seem cozy. I would much prefer a quilt. And it just is becoming so clear to me that until very recently, it was very uncomfortable to be a human on Earth, especially a poor one. So one thing I really noticed about these Swedish quilts in the book that has stuck with me since I saw this book 10 years ago is the play with light and dark in the compositions of the quilts. And these images have really stuck with me because the light is in the center and then it kind of works its way out, fades to a dark. And I think that this is obviously informed partly by the fabrics that are available, but also I really associate this with the high contrast of lots of light in the summer and lots of dark in the winter. So I think that it makes for a really unique aesthetic to these kinds of quilts. Another thing I want to mention about quilting and language in a completely different way are two resources that I found recently. I also mentioned these in my last blog post for the North House blog. And they are digital archives of quilt blocks. So this one is the webpage for the, it's on a page called the Center for Virtual Appalachia. And it's a number of collections collected from women in Kentucky. As you can see, there's an example of each quilt block, and then for many of them, you can download the pattern. And boop, boop, boop. Then the other archive that I love is owned and being digitized by my friend and quilter, Jenna Vallow. So she inherited or was given this box full of old cards that look a lot like this. Some of them are drawn in colored pencil, but it's this collection of all kinds of different quilt blocks. And she's in the process of scanning them all and uploading them. And she has created an Instagram account so that you can access them there. She's really interested in lots of people getting use from them. And so I think that what is often really interesting about these things is their names. Sometimes it seems really obvious how these things get their names, these designs get their names, and sometimes it's less obvious. So for a recent project, instructors and interns and people associated with the North House community were recently invited to create something for the Wall of Craft to celebrate North House's 25th anniversary. And what that meant was that we each got a 6 by 6 inch wooden tile to make a tiny example of our craft on. And I'm wondering if I have I'm sharing my screen anyway, never mind. I can show it later. So I chose one of the patterns from the CVA collection because it was called Sawtooth. And our range of hills that are along the North Shore here are called the Sawtooth Mountains. However, I was talking to another quilter yesterday, and the word sawtooth for her really made her think of woodworking and her dad, who was a woodworker. So I just think that there are so many ways that meaning can be present and accessed through quilts, by talking about them, by making them, by sharing them. And thank you. That's the end of my talk, except for I hope everybody has questions. Just a couple of things. In addition to the classes that I'm offering at North House, I have an online quilting class that's coming up in April. If you're interested, you can also find more information about my work and my newsletter info and contact at my website, laurabrownart.com. And on Instagram, I'm Laura Brown Art. And I have a Patreon, which is a monthly subscription service that allows me to share more about my work and allows people to help support me. So I am Laura Brown Art there as well. And so now I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm excited too. So we are going to look through some of the questions. I have my own questions as a quilter. That was delightful, first of all. I know it's more
Thank you.
I read some of the comments that use words like amazing, and I had specific comments on some of the pictures that you went through. I love history, and just the history from like around different countries to see what people put together is amazing. So some of these questions, they're going to be going back to
Sure.
different ones of your pictures. The first one that came up was about the trapunto quilt. So remind me, you said that that's the first one that's known?
Yeah, let's go back to it. Yes, so what's the question?
The question is, why do you think that it was so big?
That's a great question.
Remind us, how big was it?
It was like 120. It was like slightly larger than a king size quilt.
Wow.
So, and it had like different panels. And what I also read about it was that there was another quilt that looked like it went with it, that was like also really big.
Mm-hmm.
I also read that it had been like kind of cut up and rearranged and stitched back together. So there are some mysteries there, and I definitely put the link to it's at the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. So there's like plenty more information on their website. They have like a wonderful digital archive where they make it really easy to download photos for educational use. So that reference will be in the list of references that hopefully we can email to people, or I can share on my website as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So it's a bit of an unknown.
A bit of an unknown, at least for me. I feel not confident enough to answer in a confident way.
From the way that even this picture is, it almost looks like it should be seen hanging up, but I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
It looks like it's equivalent to a tapestry almost.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know. I'm just wondering. It is beautiful. The next, let's see, I just want to make sure that there's not another question on that one. The next question is about the convict women's quilt.
Sure.
My first question is, it looks like it's a quilt top and it hasn't been quilted into an actual quilt. So I wonder if that's why it was kind of bundled off into someone's attic.
Yeah, or that it's just like very thin, like what maybe it was a coverlet, more than a quilt.
I'm not seeing a binding. Someone is asking, did the women on board have the skills to anybody's knowledge? And wonders just about it's kind of the history of that. Was there a transport list of the women? I'm kind of wondering, has this been written up about? Is there
Yes,
or something we can read for more information?
Yes, absolutely. Also in the references. And they do have, like, they do still know who the women were. And there
Wow.
was, if they didn't already know how to sew, there was someone on board with them who was kind of in charge of helping them do this. But yeah, so I'm assuming that if they didn't know, they were able to learn.
They certainly look like they had skill. Is that
Yeah.
center then? Do you have any idea at center's applique?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's lovely. I mean,
And
it's beyond kind of some of the Baltimore quilts with some of those big
yeah.
pieces.
Yeah. And then my guess is that the outside border as well, with those like star flower shapes, those look applique as well to me.
Sure. And that was 1841.
Mhm.
Interesting, just to even look at the fabrics, let alone the artisanship.
Yeah.
We've got a couple questions on the tent pictures.
Sure.
For this one particularly, I was kind of wondering, is all of this, is it applique work and is it on the inside of the tent so that the outside is just the white so that you don't get the fading?
It does look like the inside. The information that came along with this image was like, this was given to the future King Edward VII on a visit to, like, they didn't exactly go into the technique in the caption, but I'm guessing from the context clues of like knowing the process that this is the inside, but that maybe like in some of the others, it looks like they, like this one, like this is like open to the air, you know, so maybe some of them are partially,
Wow.
they're partially open or can be open, like maybe like a garage door or something roll up the side of a tent.
Boy, that would really be affected by the sunlight.
Yeah.
The one where if you go back to the one where you wondered about that, yeah, that one, if it was go forward one more, someone that was a pillar.
Oh, a pillar. Yes.
Yeah. Could be a pillar even pushing against the tent. Or a pillar that's painted.
Yeah. It definitely looks like it's coming down between two groups of seated people. Interesting.
Someone asked if you learned anything about the hierarchy of tent makers, about whether it was a family lineage or a caste system.
Oh,
I wondered if it was a male job, a male role.
Yes, definitely a male role and definitely passed down through families. I did not read anything about it being a caste system, but my guess is that it's like a trade, you know, like a manual trade, but I don't know where it would maybe fall on the hierarchy.
It's pretty fantastic artisanship.
Yeah, I didn't read anything about that specifically.
There's a question about American quilting. The question is, I think some American quilting has something of a reputation historically as the way for women to use up scraps. So related primarily to functional thrift versus a way for people and especially women to express themselves artistically. Do you have any reflections on this, the balance related to patchwork quilts between thrift and artistry?
Oh, I think it's both. I think it's really like both of those things kind of balanced, because who doesn't want beautiful things? Just because you don't have a lot of money doesn't mean you don't want your surroundings to be beautiful. And I think if you look at, you know, yeah, kind of the whole history of American quilting, there's lots of thrift and beauty. One text that I really think about this is I think it's a book called On Beauty by Elaine Scarry, where she really makes a case for a strong relationship between beauty and justice. And to me, I then connect that to thinking about environmental considerations and sort of like social justice kinds of considerations as well, where the thrift is like isn't just for us, maybe it's for everybody, and that's like coming from a really nowadays perspective, but just imagining that, poor people might want to have beautiful things too, so why not make the thrifty scrappy quilt beautiful.
And just for those who don't know, can you tell people how you incorporate that desire for taking care of the earth in your quilts and in
Yes.
artistry?
Yeah. So a few years ago, I just stopped buying new fabric because there's just so much that already exists. There's so much at the thrift store. There's so much. I was going to, I had a couple of experiences, one at an estate sale that was like a 2-car garage packed full of craft supplies, and one in a basement that was being cleared out. And both of them were just full. The basement was full of like half finished projects, like boxes stacked to the ceiling.
I'm so embarrassed. Were you at my house? So many of us, right? Are we all the same?
So many of us. So I just was like, well, this is my future. And then I was like, it doesn't have to be. Laura, use up what you already have. And the funny thing is that like every time I try to, I'm like, I'm going to use up this fabric. I'll make a quilt and I feel like I've like cut up so many squares and I've sewn them all together. And then it's like barely made a dent in the piece of fabric that I was trying to use up. And so just thinking about, like a couple of years ago, I unknowingly gave myself a life motto of you have everything you need. And it really came out of me looking around my studio and just knowing that like I had all of the resources supplies wise to support myself as an artist creatively, financially. And then it has also grown to mean that like I have the social support and the knowledge, like I truly have everything that I need, and I don't have to like be seduced by like the catchy new thing or whatever. And also I'm just like really thrifty and I like old stuff. So anyway, that's kind of where my those experiences and that perspective is kind of where and then also I was like, ooh, a textile residency, maybe I would finally use up some of my fabric.
Yeah. Well, and I think it by using older fabric too, you're tying yourself to all these other people who at one point have owned these things. You're tying yourself. I mean, people are going to look at these quilts and maybe recognize a pattern from before. And you had talked about, when I was up there just last week, dyeing fabric and it in with old fabric. Who says that you can't break those rules? You know?
Exactly.
We had some questions which I think go right along with what you're talking about, which is kind of helping you are developing your artist's view and your artist's vision in terms of those older, some are older, some are new fabrics and textures. Someone was wondering how the color plays in with your language, and was also just really taken with the overall title, language of quilting, and how just that the language of quilts kind of speaks to you personally beyond a historical presentation.
Yeah. So sorry, what was the question?
It's about
color,
and then just the terminology language. How do those reflect upon your own?
Yeah. So I guess I think of like even I'll talk to other quilters and we kind of have these shorthands of like, oh, you know what the block, you know, like, you know what a half square triangle is, or you know what a log cabin is, and those are maybe common things that lots of people would know, but like there's sort of this, yeah, every media has its like special vocabulary. I just took a weaving class and learned the whole vocabulary of weaving, which was completely new to me. And so thinking about just like how that's part of the process of making, but then in the end result, you come up with these things that are recognizable as traditional quilt motifs or visual things. And then in terms of color, I just love color, and I love all colors, and I try to use as much of it in my work as possible, because I just think it's this like wonderful, delicious like thing that's available to us. So why not use it and like have it all around us? Also, I don't know how you get through a Minnesota winter without some color, because right now I feel like I've forgotten what grass is. So to just sort of like, it feels like food. It feels like food to me, for my eyes, and for, and I think that's one of the empowering things about sewing and quilting, is that it's a skill that you can develop and then use to process or to create, and to make things. Like, I think I'm always just astonished at taking the raw materials and making something from it. Like, it's always a little bit of a surprise, and it's always satisfying in some way. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question fully, but that's maybe a little bit more about my process.
I think it definitely gives us insight into your process. And I think we are all excited to see your quilts and what you do and where you're going. So you've probably said before, but how can we keep abreast of what you're doing? Oh,
my website, laurabrownart.com. I also see that you'll find everything there. I also see someone asking about the name of this Swedish quilt book. It's called Old Swedish Quilts, and it's by Asa. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. You can't see it probably, but it's the A with the circle over it. SAWETTRE. And I promise you, this is not one of those books that you will go on the internet and it's $200. There's plenty of copies for reasonable prices.
In Minnesota, anyway.
Somebody gave me a pronunciation. I knew that this would happen.
Osa.
Thank you so much, Nina. I better get that figured out before I go to Scandinavia.
They're very gracious.
Yeah, well.
Like everyone here, and they'll just speak English at you, so you're good.
It's true.
Yeah. So I know that there are more questions. I know that probably she's answered some of them in the presentation. So this presentation will be available online as soon as possible, very soon. And you can go on northhouse.org and watch this, or you can watch any of the other ones. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Laura, and I'm so glad that you were the capstone to these Fiber Fridays in February. It's so.
I don't know why I'm saluting.
Why not? I accept the salute. And it's been so much fun for February. I want everyone in these last few hours that we have, last couple days, let's all participate and do a little bit of fibrous fun. Back to you, Jessa.
Thank you to both Lauras. That was wonderful and just such a great example of the stories that are embedded in these crafts, and taking the time to tease out some of them is always rewarding. So a huge thank you to Laura and Laura Ricketts for hosting, and everybody for coming. We will soon be announcing a new slate of webinars for the upcoming Wood Week. So if you are interested in woodcraft things, we'll be joined by some wonderful speakers, and we'll have that in our e-news as well as on our website in the next week. I hope to see lots of you on campus and on Zoom in the future. Everyone take care and have a great weekend. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.